Hi, first video for months and months. It is July the 12th, 2020 in Tokyo. Maybe second wave of coronavirus at the moment, or more likely just like a resurgence from the previous outbreak here. Just a few updates and yeah, just thank you so much for the comments that you've been making my YouTube videos, and the messages you've been sending me, and the donations and the subscribers. It all really helps me keep going when things are tough, which is basically most of the time. I wanted to talk a bit about the medicines that are used to control cancer, and the medicines to deal with the side effects of the cancer medicines. So that's going to be part of the video, and also just some updates about what's been happening. I now take oral chemotherapy, so I'm taking this medicine, which is called S1 or TS1, or I think it's titanium silicate, and so that's my form of chemotherapy at the moment. In the past, I've been taking drips at the hospital, so you go to hospital and spend sort of a day there having various drips. Usually, like in my case, I've got, you can't really see, but there's a, you can kind of see, so you see there's a, so I'm on Apple and the image is flipped, so it's a bit hard to move my fingers. You can see there's a scar here. So beneath the scar is a big old chunk of plastic. I'm squeezing it there. There's a huge block of plastic with 3 dots on, and which the nurses can feel those 3 dots with their finger. That bit of plastic is connected to a pipe that runs into one of the blood vessels towards my heart. So that's called a chemotherapy port, and they're easy to put in, relatively easy. In many countries that would be done by a nurse practitioner. In Japan it's always done by a surgeon. And it's you don't need general anaesthetics. They don't put you to sleep. They give you a sedative to kind of knock you out, but you're still conscious, but you're unaware, but you don't. So you're aware, but you don't really care what's going on around you. And that's used to put in chemotherapy drugs by drip, because that reduces the side effects, as opposed to like putting them in your arm through a drip. And it's particularly good for someone like me, because I have thin blood vessels in my arms. About half of the people in the world have quite thin blood vessels in their arms. No idea why. It's just a thing, and has no effect at all on your health. But it does mean that when nurses want to inject you, or particularly put a drip or put a thick needle in your arm, it is difficult and painful, sometimes take several attempts. So that's why chemotherapy ports are useful. Sadly, they have another use, which is for these continuous infusions. So I think for the first year, or possibly even 2 years, I was doing continuous infusion chemotherapy. So I'd go to the hospital and get some drips. So a flush drip is put in to like clear out your port, and then they'll put in some anti-vomit drips to stop you being sick, and they'll put in like anti-allergy drips to stop you getting an allergic reaction to the chemotherapy itself. And they'll also put in steroids to kind of to reduce the fatigue that the chemotherapy drugs cause. And then I would have a chemotherapy drip after all that, maybe taking half an hour, maybe a molecular targeted therapy as well. So that's a class of drugs, and it's not they're often confused with chemotherapies. Nothing to do with chemotherapy. It attacks cancer in a different way by targeting cells which have certain proteins on the surface of the cell, so it can use those as markers. Unfortunately, all the molecular target therapies currently available target things that are on healthy cells as well, but that are what's called overexpressed on cancer cells. So after those drips, I'd then have my continuous infusion, which would be about 46 hours. So you'd be wearing around your neck this kind of pouch with a bottle in, and it's like a clear bottle, and inside that there's like a balloon. I actually showed it in some of my earlier videos. So like this balloon full of chemo drug, and it slowly kind of almost deflates. So it balances with air pressure, and as it deflates, it drips in the chemo into your blood at about, I think mine was 3 milliliters or 3 cubic centimeters per hour over a period of 46 hours. Because it's temperature dependent, so it's got like a temperature sensing valve that goes against your body, but in winter it might be kind of closer to 50 something hours, and you sleep with it and you have to shower with it, and it was horrible. And you've got a big old needle stuck in, a needle about that long but kind of thick as well, stuck through that port, that the nurse, when he or she is going to put in the needle, they're feeling for the 3 dots on the port, and they smack the needle on quite hard, because not to get it through your skin, which is, you know, thin layer of skin, but it's to get through that block of plastic. Unpleasant stuff. So at the moment I've switched to oral chemotherapy. This contains the same drug that I was having in those continuous infusion drips, a drug called 5-FU, but this is actually contains a prodrug of 5-FU, which means when you take the tablets, when they get metabolized in your liver, then it turns into 5-FU. So then it's kind of quite a different pattern compared to the continuous infusion. You get like a peak of 5-FU, lasts some hours, kind of tails off. I take this every other day, so 2 tablets in the morning, 2 tablets in the evening. When I take the evening ones, the 2 morning ones have not yet completely finished, so then I get this sort of increased dose in the evening, which hopefully is good for fighting cancer cells, but unfortunately gives me quite bad fatigue. Yeah, so that's why I'm on those oral ones. So these are not massively common in Europe and the US. They're becoming more popular in the US. This particular one, I mean, I think it's titanium silicate. One of the good points of this drug, titanium silicate, is you can take it like low dose for extended periods with no long breaks. So usually with chemotherapy, the idea is you have it in like a day until you're almost dying, and then they give you a rest, and then you have it again 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, depending on the drug combo. And during that kind of 2 or 3 weeks break, the cancer obviously has a chance to flourish and take over your body and spread to your spine and all that horrible stuff that I presumably am going to experience at some point when I run out of medicines to try. So, oral chemo. This drug is called Metformin. I take 3 of these a day, so 1 after each meal. And that's actually an anti-diabetes drug. I don't have diabetes, but I'm taking that for 2 reasons. One is that that drug makes it hard for your cells to do anaerobic respiration. So that's respiration where it's not got the presence of enough oxygen. So things like if you're doing a sprint in sports, you know, hard, intense activity, you use up all the kind of free oxygen in your body, and you're going into anaerobic respiration. cancer cells are notoriously bad at doing aerobic respiration, so they do anaerobic respiration, but in a particularly inefficient way. So this is often called like a metabolic therapy, so it kind of interferes with the metabolism of the cancer. Metabolism is just the processes that release energy from stored forms of energy, and obviously digestion is part of that as well. But cell metabolism, metformin interferes with cell metabolism. Taking it for another reason, I should say particularly one of the reasons why this is potentially a very, very important drug in the future for cancer is that it seems to damage the cancer stem cells. Those are the cells that, just like a normal stem cell in your body that can become another cell in the future, the cancer stem cells, it's believed, are responsible for new tumor growth and spreading to other places. So this is very important. The other reason I'm using it, which is kind of a bit weird, but again potentially game-changing, is that it may help undo some of the damage that chemotherapy and radiotherapy do to your body. So I've had, in the past 4 years, I've basically had chemo for 3.5 years. I had like a 6-month break after some liver surgery, but that's really been it in terms of proper breaks. I've been on just chemotherapy all the time, like every 2 weeks, going to the hospital, having a day of drips. And that damages your body because you get this thing called fibrosis. Now, I believe that the thing of fibrosis, so the image is flipped. I'm not crazy. I'm not having trouble moving my hands. But if you imagine these are like some fibrous tissue in your body, the fibers. With fibrosis, the tissue is damaged and it repairs itself by putting like these cross links in, and the tissue is like hard. Scar tissue is, kind of traumatic scar tissue is like an example of fibrosis. But with chemo and with radiation, you're getting fibrosis in your heart particularly. But also if you have radiotherapy, wherever you're targeted with the radiotherapy. So, I've got stuff in my lung, my right lung, where I had radiotherapy for a tumour there. I had radiotherapy in my liver, 40 fractions, so 40 times with proton beam therapy. And then later, I think it was 20 times with tomotherapy, which is an X-ray based or gamma ray based therapy. So possibly taking metformin. I never know if it's in Japanese we call it metahormin. I think in English it's called metformin. A very, very common, cheap, very safe diabetes drug. Been used for years and years and years by, I guess, hundreds of thousands of patients around the world. So if this cheap, safe medicine can have even a small effect on extending life by attacking cancer stem cells and also reversing some of the damage from radiotherapy and chemotherapy, then that could be a very important medicine in the future. This is what we call off-label drug use. So you're using a medicine not for what it's designed for or not what it's approved for. So this is developed and approved for diabetes. Another very, very common example of that would be aspirin. Aspirin was a painkiller developed from like willow bark, I think. The willow tree contains whatever the thing is that becomes aspirin. I think it's acylic acid, something like that, which is why people used to like chew bits of willow branches in the past when they had toothache. And and still do where I come from, where I grew up rather, in the UK, in Norfolk. So aspirin is used all over the world for people with heart trouble because one of the effects of aspirin is it makes your blood thinner, kind of wetter and less sticky. So if you're kind of prone to heart disease, then that can be a good thing to take. I'm also taking this weird medicine, which is very common in Japan, not known. I should have checked this online first, what it's called in English, but this is a bacteria. I think it's like powdered bacteria. Take 6 of these a day, and it's a bacteria that helps with digestion. You get a lot of digestion trouble when you had radiotherapy, chemotherapy. In my case, also, I've had a big chunk of my intestine removed. So yeah, very common drug we use in Japan. It's not, unfortunately, so it's like a good bacteria for your digestion, and one that often gets like wiped out by chemo or whatever. Unfortunately, it's not one that like builds up in your digestive system. So you basically only get the effect of this when you take it. So unlike allegedly with those probiotic drinks or whatever, they're going to contain bacteria which will kind of grow and culture in your digestive system, so your gastrointestinal tract, and benefit you longer term. This is kind of, you take the pills and it should help a bit. Another fun medicine I've started taking, this is like a bizarre Asian medicine, allegedly developed in China or whatever. There's like this whole class of dumb Asian drugs for like stomach, liver, this kind of thing. So you just call them by the number. So it's like number 14. So this is to kind of reduce some of the side effects of the chemo in terms of like digestion. The reason I say it's dumb and annoying is like this stuff, it works, has quite a big effect. However, because it's kind of developed from like how do I say, like, because it's kind of comes from before, like what you might call traditional medicine or whatever, there's like a whole mixture of stuff pressed together in pills. It's not potent. So this is what you take in a day. In each of these, there's 3 tablets. So you're taking 18 tablets in a day. And, I'm sure if they did lab analysis, this is going to be like, in there will be things like ginger extract, which is an anti-inflammatory. So it's going to help with like the lining of the gut and stuff. And there'll be a whole bunch of stuff in there. It's very, very likely that the effect comes from 2 or 3 of the things in there, and all the other stuff is unnecessary and stupid. So a tiny bit of money and some sensible research would turn this into a couple of pills a day. It is horrendously bitter. These are pills that you can kind of swallow with water, but because it's not potent, that means like if you have it like with a big cup of water, big tumbler of water, you're gonna not get so much absorption in the stomach. So you have to kind of like take it with a small amount of water. I originally took it in a powder form. It's like a sachet of powder that you're meant to like tip in your mouth and then gulp down a tiny amount of warm water. But that kind of made me throw up basically. So that's that. And one more. I take this sometimes. This is a really, really good medicine for chemo side effects. This is to stop like acid coming up through your up through the digestive tract, right? So you get that a lot with chemo. It's a common side effect of radiotherapy. It's very common after abdominal surgery as well. So this is used if you if you suffer from like acid reflux, I think it's called, anything like that, you're often given a drug called a proton pump inhibitor, which like stops excess stomach acid forming. This is a bit like that, but it's a different mechanism and much more effective. This is called Takecab, Japanese drug. It's a potassium competitive antacid. So it goes in your stomach and presumably mops up the potassium. So it kind of rebalances your stomach, stops the excess, stops excess acid formation. It's a really good drug because it's one pill in a day if you need it, and you can actually take it before you start getting the acid reflux, unlike these PPIs, the proton pump inhibitors, which kind of only work when there's acid in your stomach. Fantastic new Japanese drug, only a few years old. There is no reason for the vast majority of people in the world to be using those old-fashioned proton pump inhibitors when they can use Takecab instead. So those are some of the pills I'm taking. So on chemo days, I'm taking 4 tablets of TS1, 3 of the Metformin, 6 of these, so that is 13, 18 of these, so we're now at like 31 tablets, and possibly Takecab too, so 32 tablets. So that's a whirlwind tour of some of the drugs. So those are the drugs I take at the moment. I have taken loads of other things over the last 4 years of battling against terminal cancer. When I took proton beam therapy, because one of the area of my liver being treated was like quite close to the stomach, so there was a risk of getting stomach ulcer that would like bleed and be horrific. So I had to have medicines to like improve the lining of the stomach to stop the stomach acid eating through where the stray radiation was hitting the stomach and stuff like that. So those are the fun-filled medicines I'm taking at the moment. Scan-wise and tumour-wise and blood-wise, I'm doing okay at the moment. So the last 3 scans have been good, meaning no visible tumours. Usually for cancer patients that would be fantastic news. They would call that complete remission. We don't say that in my case because my cancer spread to the abdominal membrane called the peritoneum, and on the membrane you usually don't get big tumours until you're in the very, very, very last stages of life. What you get is like lots of small tumours, kind of, they call it like a shotgun effect. All these little tumours, kind of 1 or 2 millimeters, 3 millimeters across, all over the membrane, and they don't show up on the scans because first of all they're actually too small. The scans, my CT scans probably can pick up something like 1/5 of an inch or something, so like 5 millimeter resolution is what it can pick up. Even if you had 5 millimeter tumours on your peritoneum, that's the abdominal membrane, they might not show up because they're kind of flat, and the way that the scans work, they can only really see things with some depth to them, 3D things, because of the quantum effects that they're using. I have another scan on Tuesday, which is Sunday today, so a couple of days' time. That's a radioactive scan, so the PET scan. They will inject me with radioactive sugar, and then I lie down in a darkened room for an hour while the sugar goes around my body, and it will go to where the cancer is, because cancer is hungry for sugar. And then I get a scan machine that uses positrons, so it's going to like fire. I don't know if it fires the positrons, or if it more likely maybe absorbs them maybe it picks up the positrons being emitted from this radioactive sugar. So it's like it's just I think it's called FDG. So it's like a glucose with one of the atoms in it replaced with radioactive fluorine, I believe. Because of the timing, like I go to the clinic on Fridays, and my doctor's kind of unwilling to look at the scan result in this case without the official radiographer's report. Because the scan is on a Tuesday, radiographer's report is probably not going to be ready on the Friday, which means I probably won't get the result until the following Friday. So I have what's called scanxiety, I think it is. So like this is when cancer patients are anxious about scans coming up. So I've got a little bit of scanxiety at the moment because, yeah, it's possible that there's going to be new tumours or old tumours that were not destroyed completely with the chemo and radiotherapy will be back. The reason I'm having the PET scan, even though only 2 months ago I had a CT scan, is that I'm desperately trying to convince the surgeons here who I know to give me surgery to do what's called a colostomy reversal or stoma closure. 4 years ago, when the cancer was found, the surgeon in Japan took out the section of my intestine about that long, I think, of the large intestine. That's like the wide one that absorbs the water as opposed to absorbing the nutrition, and made a colostomy, so cut a hole in my stomach and pulled the intestine out through my body and stitched it up. So I've got like this hole in my body with a plastic bag stuck over to collect the waste, which is deeply unpleasant and makes daily life pretty miserable a lot of the time. So I'm desperate for this surgery to reverse it, even though quality of life after having the reversal is not going to be particularly good. There'll be a whole load of other issues for me because of what was removed in that original surgery. But in Japan, it's not considered an important surgery at all. They just say, well, learn to live with a colostomy. So that's what I'm fighting for. But anyway, thank you so much for listening. More updates soon. And please leave a comment of any question you'd like me to ask and answer in my next video. Cheers. Goodbye.